Hey.
All right. All right.
It's 2 o'clock.
All right. All right.
We got to get a theme song.
All right.
This is so cheesy and so good.
Let's get Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine and Patrick from Fallout Boy to put one together.
Do we know anybody? do we
MJ,
know
AB.
them?
I could hit up a couple people to play guitar on it, maybe.
And we'll have MJ do the vocals.
Oh, hell no.
And we'll have Adrian do the screaming, and then Jim can play bass. I'll play drums. Henry could rap and do the.
You don't want to hear me rap, but you know what? a roadie band, like there's plenty of like roadies that are like amazing musicians that we could.
Well, Ray Amico isn't Ray.
Yeah, have you seen Ray Amico's group?
I saw that. It's so hard.
Right, and like Jackie says, Doug can DJ. Yeah, we had definitely that's kind of going on in the behind the scenes. chatter amongst ourselves. We're definitely going to get
Yeah,
old Dougie to do us theme song.
yeah. So we're just waiting on Luke for a few more minutes, and I think Mark is trying to join us. But no worries. How's everyone doing?
Everyone is doing. I was outdoors this morning. Big news, everyone.
Ooh.
I drove a golf cart. I drove a golf cart today.
And you survived.
Yeah, I did, and so did Keith Mitchell. So that's good. so did my passenger. So that's even better.
That's amazing.
Did you golf, or were you just driving the golf cart?
I am just the driver. I do not golf.
Were they screaming that then?
I enjoy the outdoors. I watched a civilian beach a golf course, and I watched 2 roadies unbeach it in 18 seconds after 4 of them could not get that golf cart unstuck. Guy Sykes and Keith Mitchell roadied it in 18 seconds. It was pretty amazing. I have photos.
Jeez.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's further proof that we could run the world. No problem. No problem.
He's here, but I don't see him in the chat.
Who, Luke?
Yeah. He just sent us an email and said he's here.
He not jump on the right. I gave him the right code. Maybe he jumped on the same one as yesterday and didn't notice that.
Oh yeah, maybe. Maybe he's hanging in a room all alone.
We need to send a reconnaissance team for Luke.
He's in the bar next door.
Did William?
Woohoo, there he is.
Hey, there we are.
Hey, buddy.
Hey.
W. Luke.
That's where the William is. If I'm sure I should have sent that to you, everybody, in advance of this. First name's William, so I'm sure it's got you all screwed up in there. How y'all doing?
Awesome.
Good.
Good to be here.
Awesome to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Are we doing like sound checks on this? How's everybody's tone? Do you sound great?
We're live.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
sound good. We're live.
We're live with you.
Perfect.
We've got our students in the chat here, and they're also joining us on YouTube. But you know, we are. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Usually, Mark jumps on the intro of the show. Does anybody else want to take a crack at it while we wait for Mark?
Sure.
MJ?
Welcome to episode 38, everybody. Today we have the great pleasure of having Luke Pierce from Promoter 101, who partners with Dan Steinberg. They've had a wonderful podcast that has been gaining traction. They went, I believe it was 240 episodes and took a break and then revived. So we're going to talk with them about their trajectory, how they inform, how they've been informed, and, you know, kind of talk amongst ourselves about the way we use these platforms to inform and educate and connect and better the industry.
Yeah, there hasn't been this much excitement for a crossover episode since the Jetsons appeared on the Flintstones. So today is a real yeah. So, I mean, folks, if you haven't listened to Promoter 101, it's a widely followed and very influential show in the music industry. Like Adrian said, with over 200 episodes, they've built up a hilarious and informative anthology of sorts to the music business that we felt our students would learn a lot from. So let's welcome to Tour Management 101 from Promoter 101, Mr. Luke Pierce.
Hey, that was a fantastic intro. Thank you very much. Great to be here, and hello to everybody in the chat. I just want to say thanks for having me on the show today, and I've really been enjoying what you've been doing here during the last couple months, the platform that you guys are working to create here, the community, the education you're getting from all this. I think it's just a wonderful resource, and I'm pretty thrilled to be on here talking to y'all today. So looking forward to this.
Really cool coming from you guys. But you know, Luke, we as we delve into all of our guests' careers, we always want to start with sort of the origin story. So, Can you give us a little bit of background on your background and how you got into the music industry? Because you didn't start in music at all, did you?
Uh-oh.
Oh,
You're
Uh-oh.
muted.
We lost audio.
Oh, sorry.
there you go. Good.
Apologies. It's like the first time I've done one of these things. No, I was born in Indiana, but I grew up mostly in the East Coast, and I went to Penn State, which is not a school for music business. It's not really a school too much for music in general. And I studied finance and economics while I was there, and come from a family of bankers and manufacturing folks. And I was sent there by the parents with no direction really to get a degree in accounting, finance, or economics for my options, and I chose the latter couple. And for about a year after I graduated from school, and this is in 2009, 2010, I worked in finance doing some consulting as well as a little bit of investment banking between New York and Los Angeles, and I ultimately arrived in Manhattan Beach, California, where I really wanted to get out to the West Coast to go work in film and TV. That was like my huge aspiration, was wanting to work in entertainment.
Hey, Luke, can we, before we get too far, can you just touch on that one music business Penn State Connect and how you got your little toes in you got your toes in the water at Penn State via?
Yes. I have to attribute a lot of it to Will Zombach. And if anyone knows who's Will is, he's the CEO of Taylor Gang Entertainment. Will and I were both in the fraternity scene at Penn State, and Will was at the time road managing for Wiz Khalifa, who was from Pittsburgh. So we were really lucky at Penn State to have a really great music scene that included Wiz Khalifa on the come up. I mean, this is like, we're talking Wiz Khalifa at house parties for $500. Will would hate that I said that. Mac Miller playing in basements, Chitty Bang from Philly, Mike Stud, Hoodie Allen, and that was kind of the frat rap scene that we all kind of came up with. And I was fortunate enough in my time at Penn State to be able to be involved in a lot of student leadership positions, and one of them was a student government position that allowed me to basically throw a giant festival. They gave us a huge budget, and we were able to book a bunch of six-figure talents over a couple-year period and start that up. And that kind of gave me the taste for music, even though I never really thought about doing anything else with that beyond it. It was just a cool thing to do in college. You were throwing parties, right? It wasn't like a business aspiration for me. I had to go do something in finance or whatever it was. So I, after graduation, set off for New York very briefly, then to LA. And when I got to LA looking to work in film and TV, I used my Penn State alumni network, and I found a guy by the name of David Britz, who's the CEO of Works Entertainment and now my business partner. And David also went to Penn State about a few years before Will and I did, and he had a little practice that he was working in at another management company at the time. And I took a general information interview with him. And 4 or 5, 6 months kind of transpired, and I got an email from David one morning on like a Tuesday at like 4:30 in the morning. He was vacation with his family in the East Coast, and somebody had quit in his office. And I think kind of what he said to me, and the extent of this, and I'm paraphrasing this email, was, I know you don't want to work in music, but you're clearly stuck in a finance track out here and you want to break out of it. Come work for me in music for a year, and you'll make relationships with all your little 3-letter agency friends, and go get a job as an agent, and you can go off to be a producer or whatever you want to do. I just know that I need somebody, and you seem like you've kind of got the pedigree and background to handle something like this, and I think you'd be decent at it. So come work for me for a year. So that afternoon, I gave my supervisor over at this consultancy I was working at my 2 weeks notice, and started working for David that evening, actually, like answering emails and doing day-to-day and assistant stuff for David. And so after about a year, I'd still, it was a really great experience working directly for David and all the clients and all the awesome things that he was working on at the time. It was phenomenal to meet other people at agencies. I made a lot of contacts at ICM, APA, UTA, CAA, WME, all the agencies that I just kind of had mentioned there, and really did try to chart a course, back into film or TV. And after about a year, I did have an offer to go work for a film studio, and actually working on a project about Penn State, which was a hot button issue in 2012. I went to David and said, I've got this opportunity. It's kind of what I came here to work for, but I really have enjoyed every part of music. And I watch all my poor friends go to, work at 7:30 in the morning in a suit and a tie. And I get to come to work in jeans and a t-shirt and listen to music all day. Like, this just seems like such a way of life, So he said, if you like doing this and, you can kind of divert your passion and energy towards it, you seem like you're doing well at it. So let's give it a shot. So I continue to work for him. And about a year and a half later, he and I broke out and I joined him to start Works Entertainment. So been doing this as an independent music company, first in Los Angeles, only with David and I and another partner from small beginnings. And now it's myself running the Nashville office, David running the company in our LA office. And, we've got a roster of 10 clients, 3 festivals, and a bunch of different advisory and label services that we run now through our management business. So 7 years later, we are very proud to still be standing and growing, every year until about March 12th, 2020. We were having a great run on everything, just like I imagine everybody else is. But a company for artists of all types of genres to come and build businesses. We pride ourselves on artist development and centering our businesses around artists and helping unique people find voices and platforms and businesses. So that's Works Entertainment in a nutshell. We're happy to be working in this crazy business.
I want to go back a couple steps because it's amazing what Works has been able to build up over the years. But for our students, I just want to see, like, there may be some takeaways there of like your trajectory. Although like your path is unique to yourself, a lot of our students are in college programs and they do have, student groups or, likely will have them return. And so getting involved in those student groups that put on concerts is an amazing way to build up into this industry. So if you have that resource available in college, please take it. But that was a huge course for you. And then you really just set out to go find what you wanted. But that's an amazing opportunity that sort of brought you full circle back to Penn State.
Yeah, I'm really lucky to work with another Penn Stater. Penn Staters are a tight-knit bunch of people that take care of one another. And I think if you are a Penn Stater, you find another Penn Stater anywhere in the world, we're really happy to celebrate that with each other. And so I'm really lucky to have somebody to root, for the Penn State football team on Saturdays every time of the year and just kind of share in those experiences. And honestly, going to a big school that afforded me opportunities to kind of see large scale things. Nothing small is ever done at Penn State. They do it to the max. So when we put on a festival as a student organization, 12,000 people show up. When you're doing concerts, you're doing them with Bernie Punt and Al Carosis at BJC, and it's for, it's the biggest names coming through the middle of center Pennsylvania. So I was really lucky to go to a big school and be able to see the kind of scale and opportunity that existed at in entertainment and what you can really do for these things. So I feel really lucky to have had a Penn State education, and more beyond that. I wasn't the best student, admittedly, but I got a great deal of experience out of all my extracurricular work at Penn State, and had a phenomenal time doing so. So lucky to have that.
So fantastic, because it speaks back to the value of college activities and events programs teaching you so many valuable skills. And I definitely recommend to anyone who's still in a program who has some time right now to definitely go get involved with your college, with your college programs. I started in high school, doing talent shows and band stuff. And that's kind of where you can really get within, the volunteer and education system. You can get some good experience.
Absolutely. And it's, despite no matter what size your school, you're probably working, if you're bringing in talent, you're at least getting exposure to the agency world and the live side of things. And whether you work with a talent buyer that helps you contract that, I know a lot of private universities require there to be kind of an intermediary in those things. You still can make contact and make, like in the offer process, just get to know people at agencies. And I feel like that is a great nexus for a lot of contacts. Especially if you do what you're going to say you're going to do and pay the artists and treat them well and have a bunch of people show up, agencies will respond favorably to you. And so when you're looking to make contacts, and even if you don't want to be an agent, it's a great nexus to just beginning your relationships professionally with other people inside the music business. I remember at the time, we went from booking Wiz for a very low number, and then he got Peter Schwartz from the agency group at the time, and we went to go book him for a festival 2 years later, and the price tag had gone crazy through the roof, and we had to all of a sudden an agent in the mix. But I still, we had Peter on Promoter 101. It was great to talk about the time that when I was in my fraternity house my junior year, emailing back and forth with Peter Schwartz about that. That was one of the first kind of connections in the business that I was able to make through those transactions. And I think student programming associations, programming boards, whatever they call them, at your school, whether you're doing, $5,000 or $500,000 budgets, it's just a great way to learn the mechanics of booking and live and everything around it. And even if you don't want to be promoting shows, you get to see that side of it and understand what goes on in a backstage, in a production, in an advanced setting. And that's going to be a really valuable skill set to distinguish you from other people that don't have those experiences. So
true. Not to mention the, just the financial and, the settlement and the money side of the business. But I mean, you were majoring in finance. So did you plug and play what you were learning in finance into your early days of putting on shows at that time?
No, not really. And that's the one knock that I will say about working for a student programming board. It was $3 from every student, and it went into a fund, and it didn't matter who showed up or not, So not having skin in the game for those kind of festival buying things wasn't the best experience, because you really don't, there's nothing on the line for it. But we did plenty of house parties where we would have to book lesser acts and work on some sort of like guarantee or split if we were like selling into these things. And that's when it really did matter. Could I get, what was the difference between 200 people showing to my party and 300 people showing to my party paying, $5 or $10? Like, what was that? Those kind of decisions were always measured pretty decently when we did a few of the private shows that we did. But you certainly learn how to manage and operate a budget at the very least, whether or not there's revenue that you're striking against that, or it's just funny money to you because it's the school or students' money in many cases. You still have to operate in the constraints of a budget. And I think that's really helpful, just to see all the line items of what goes into a day. I'm turning a big green giant lawn into a little city for the day. And like, what does the stage cost? What does that have to come in? What is sound, lights, security, fencing, all those things that go into those things. That was phenomenal, just to get a grasp of the moving parts that were out there. And I think that really did help give me a leg up in those early years of at least knowing what the moving parts were. I think a lot of people walk into these things only having been on one side of the stage in a concert setting, not realizing all the shit that goes on behind the scenes, and knowing what it takes to prepare for that definitely gives you an advantage and definitely opens your eyes to all the moving parts.
I'm willing to bet a handful of our students are like, I'm gonna fucking try that as soon as I can. That's gonna be amazing. I'm gonna throw a party. But let's move forward, and I want to talk about your co-host Dan Steinberg a little bit. Tell me a little bit about Dan. Tell the students who haven't met him on a show, what's Dan's background, and how did you guys kind of mesh together?
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with Dan Steinberg, I'm guessing you're not on music business Twitter or any sort of corner of the internet where there are loud people. Dan is one of the most colorful characters in our business, but no bullshit aside, he's one of the best promoters in the game out there. And that's why I started working with Dan to start with. Dan and David Britz were doing a lot of shows together with Straight No Chaser. And when I was working for David, I was on the phone a lot with Dan, taking care of marketing, advance, all those kind of things you deal with. So I struck out an early relationship just in working with Dan on all of these projects. And I just found Dan to be, just a no BS, blunt, straight to the point kind of person every time you talk to him, which is pretty refreshing, I got to say, when you spend a lot of time fluffing a matter for whatever reason. And so Dan and I probably started working together for the first time in the end of 2011, early 2012. And just quickly, he and I became friends over a few things. One, we found out that we loved The West Wing together, which is like one of our favorite TV shows. We talk about it a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the business that love West Wing as well too. But we started going to shows and conferences together and kind of running in that crowd. And Dan began his career. He's a concert promoter out of Seattle, but he started in Denver, and he was 16 or 17 years old doing punk shows. And I think there's probably some stories in this group here about Steinberg shows in Denver. It was in Colorado, but Dan started his promotions company out of his parents' basement when he was 16 years old, doing decent shows. And I'm sure from the humble beginnings, you've got some stories, I bet, Mary Jo.
Yeah, there were. I mean, I remember when Dan first started doing shows at the Aslan Theater in Denver, which was just where all the punk rock shows were, and it was just, I think it was a little family-owned place that you could rent out because it was cheap and it was falling apart. But you did some great shows there, A lot of Stormy Shepherd bands. Yeah.
Yeah. And Dan's got stories for days about calling APA's Andy Summers for Green Day shows. I mean, like he was swinging for the fences at a very young age and doing a lot of things in the Denver market, which is, it's a really trafficked and competitive market now. I'm sure it was just as competitive back then when a 16-year-old was going up against Barry Fay. I mean, let's talk about ballsy.
And Doug Kaufman too, because that's when Doug was direct competition at that point. Yeah.
And so Dan cut his teeth there in that market. He ended up going out to Oregon for a couple of years for school, was doing stuff in Eugene, and then settled in Washington. And he previously operated under Square Peg Concerts, which was Dan's independent promotions company. And he had a longtime business partner of a guy named Jason Zink, who was at Sherpa Concerts. And Dan and Jason got together and I guess they formally merged their business. I want to say it was like 2016 or 17 and became Emporium Presents, which is a partnership. And Jason maintained offices in Denver and Nashville, and Dan with the West Coast. And they eventually brought on a Birmingham, Alabama office. So, I mean, they went from kind of the territorial, groupings of promoters and operating in the Rockies and the Pacific Northwest to being really a national footprint and be able to buy as an indie, which
they're all over the place. It's quite impressive. Their shows spread across the country.
Yeah, and so he was. Will Zombach just texted me right now, by the way. He said that's awesome. So I told him we're on this thing, Mary Jo. So after a couple of years of operating as Emporium, I think largely due to Promoter 101, Dan sold his business to Live Nation and joined Live Nation at the end of 2017. So from his parents' basement to selling out to Live Nation, I'd say selling out like it's bad. It's a phenomenal accomplishment, and he deserves every bit of it. And he joined and has only grown his business like crazy since then. Dan is a testament to like what true independent grit and work will do, because that guy is a hustler. And I think what I learned the most from Dan is just Dan's flair for shameless self-promotion, which is required when you're starting to create a brand, and there should be nothing shameless about it. I mean, Dan is out there hawking his his clients tickets to shows, but he's also, selling his brand and selling him. And he does a phenomenal job of doing that. So if you just Google Dan Steinberg in like Polestar or any conference, you'll probably see a picture of Dan Steinberg dressed up as either Peter Pan, Willy Wonka, or a referee. And Dan used to go to these conferences and host all these wild panels where he would ask these insane questions and serve you tequila at 10:30 in the morning if you answered them incorrectly. And he'd be wearing, he'd have a referee outfit for some moderated thing. He'd have a Willy Wonka thing and make it all about, the Candyland of touring, or he had some Peter Pan outfit. I don't remember what that one was, but I just remember he wore a Peter Pan outfit to all of his meetings that day, which was, how do you forget a guy like that, right? So he's a phenomenal guy, and I encourage you all to check him out. You can email him, steiny@promoter101.net. He would love to hear from you. He loves stuff like this. I'm sorry I couldn't have him on here to join me today, but he's a really big part of Promoter 101, the biggest part of it, and a really big part of my career in terms of being a mentor and a friend to what I've done in the past 10 years.
Luke, I'd love to hear a little bit about the podcast genesis, how you and Dan weren't really looking to start a podcast, and kind of paving the way as podcasts were starting to kind of become a thing. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of Promoter 101 and the story around that.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to keep it brief because I'm sure there's plenty of this history available online. But Dan and I were in 2013, 2014. I talked about our obsession with the show The West Wing. Rishikesh Hirway, who's a podcaster, does Song Exploder, and Josh Molina, who was in The West Wing. He's been in a bunch of other TV stuff, as David Rosen on Scandal now, TV actor. They decided to do this episode by episode revisitation of West Wing, which Dan and I got so amped about. And this was kind of in a time when podcasting wasn't necessarily the huge live touring property, but we started to see opportunities in live. And so being just business collaborators and partners on a lot of things, Dan and I had the idea that, it'd be great if we could produce this tour for this West Wing thing. That'd be amazing. We would do it for free just to meet Aaron Sorkin and hang out and with those folks. But we knew nothing about the mechanics of podcasting. It was still, despite in 2014, 2015, when we were kind of noodling on these ideas, podcasting had been around for 9-10 years at that point, and it was still a really, it was a very low 9-figure business in terms of like the overall audio space. It wasn't huge. Pod Save America was not around knocking down theaters, selling out shows everywhere. It was still a relatively nascent thing, but we thought there might be a marketplace for us to go in, either find an existing podcast and workshop it so that it could be a live show, and then tour that property around. And, I could basically be the producer workshop of that thing, and Dan would take the promotions business on for that. So what we found in having these kind of like mastermind whiteboard conversations is that neither of us really knew anything about podcasting, how it's done, or how to talk to creatives. It wasn't like necessarily like making a record. It was more like making a radio show or like a TV play, in a lot of cases. And so we had to learn that. And so, I went to a few podcast conventions to kind of just get the feet wet and like see how people talked about it, read a bunch, listened to a lot of podcasts about podcasting. And then finally one day we're like, we should just try doing something, interviewing our friends about this. And Dan at the time was tweeting a ton of rants about whatever was going on in the world. And he would do hashtag Promoter 101. And so it kind of started from a tweet from that, but it was really the platform that we were going to use to kind of begin to understand podcasting and maybe see if we could take the skills that we learned from doing a limited run of things and apply them in a business setting to go develop a podcast. And ultimately, I think our thesis proved we probably were just 2 years too early and then got distracted with other things before we actually ever toured properties. But out of this came Promoter 101. So it was it's been quite a crazy ride for us throughout all this stuff. And I've just been thrilled about who we've been able to get access to. And really, when I look back at a lot of this, it's been an incredible tool for Dan and I to develop our personal brands. I think it was a big reason why Dan was able to get in with Live Nation and help make that sale process part of that. I think it was big for me in signing a few clients because it gave me name recognition as a young manager in the business. And so it was a great just branding tool and exercise. And beyond that, just as a very curious, person and wanting to meet people, it gave phenomenal access to ask the type of questions that I wanted to hear from people. So I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world, to be able to spend an unadulterated 60 to 90 minutes with somebody, asking them about their experience and their work in music. And that's what the origin of Promoter 101 was.
That's great. And it's just amazing to hear how y'all just have extended the conversation and have covered so much ground. Almost 250 podcasts in today. Did you ever think it would come that far?
I didn't think. I thought we would do 101 episodes or something like that. Just kind of cap it off. But the more we did it, the more we did realize that there were people that we didn't know in the business, and the more that we realized there were important voices that we wanted to give a platform to. And so we kind of just kept rolling through 101. We eventually did take a hiatus at like 201 because we thought that was a number to do. But during the quarantine sessions, Dan has gone back, and I've gone back and done some interviews of people that we just think are very interesting. And we haven't committed ourselves to the kind of weekly schedule of audience building that we were doing, because it was taking a good bit of time and resources away from both of us, and a lot, particularly around conferences. We pre-can all these interviews. We'd go to a conference. Dan would bring the remote setup with him, and Dan would set up for like 2 days, before and after the conference. And you just do at the hour, every hour, hit, 10 or 12 people a day and just knock out all these interviews. And so, it's a lot of time, resources, and preparation goes into making a good podcast. And as I'm sure the panelists here will talk about, because we did one of these prep things yesterday, it's not a thing that you can take in lightly if you're going to build it properly. So I didn't think we would keep going on it, but 3 years into it, we were ecstatic to see we had built a following of people inside the music business, following of students and teachers that were using our interviews as references in lectures and things like that. And, it just became something that became very important to both of us, that we kept going for a while. So I imagine in some form we'll continue to always have new content. It may just not be a weekly situation on a go-forward basis, because we have logged a ton of miles and a ton of names so far.
Can I ask you really quick, when you say that you personally thought you might go to 101 episodes, what was the significance of that? Was that just because you were called Promoter 101? And
yeah, I just, and that's like an episode a week. That's like 2 years of time. So I was like, 101 seems, like the right number that was in there. And maybe we'll do kind of a limited edition snapshot of the world in our time. But I think those additional 120 something episodes at this point that we've done since 101 really has broadened the kind of length and breadth of what Promoter 101 is, which I think now is more than anything a time capsule, an anthology of a time of the music business. And we've been able to kind of really, through Dan's lens, look at the people that he was working with in the early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, and kind of just, make a chronology of the music business during that time and kind of capture the characters, the stories, the, who worked at who, the kind of, genealogy, so to speak, of the music business and how connected people are inside of it. And so,
I mean, that's 100% true. If you sort of look at the ways that all of us on this panel, I mean, literally, I had not had the pleasure of making your acquaintance before. And yesterday you said Penn State, and I said Will Dezambach, and you said Wiz Khalifa, and immediately you're my cousin. And Will's texting us, and he's all excited that we know each other, and that's really cool, and that speaks to the connectedness. But I want to ask you guys how you managed to take that industry connectedness and grow your audience on Promoter 101, parlaying that into an actual, we're all connected and we all have lots of connections and contacts, but getting people's attention is a different story.
Yeah, and that's why I touched briefly on how good Dan is on building, his personal brand. Square Peg was I would argue, one of the better known independent promoters in a very crowded market. And that's because Dan did a lot of like wild things like branding. Like Dan would send out stupid stuff like this from Emporium, which is just a little, bulldozer thing with Emporium branding on it. They sent me a fucking bulldozer is what Dan says. So Dan would send things out and was just the master of swag and hawking stuff. And he would be all over socials. And from that kind of actual like elbow grease, grassroots effort, post on your socials. But beyond that, like a lot of just texting, emailing, building out the kind of listenership by just hitting our friends directly and say, listen to this cool thing I did.
Right.
That's how we started building the audience. And it was a lot of social posts. It was a lot of posting in music business networking groups. LinkedIn was a phenomenal resource for us. Like we didn't discover that until the 70th or 80th episode. We always used to joke about all the cool kids being on LinkedIn, but like a lot of our referral traffic came from LinkedIn. None of the cool kids, by the way, are on LinkedIn. I would just say that.
Where are they, Luke? Where are the cool kids?
Cool kids now are probably in Instagram DMs or just Snapchatting you. So that's probably where the really cool kids are.
And for business, where are the cool business kids?
The cool business kids they are on LinkedIn. They know what's up. They know how to reach folks out there. So
got it. Copy that. Just making sure I know where to get my coolness at.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about, look, obviously there has been, the wave of podcasts is a thing. And clearly now, since we have this hiatus, there are lots of podcasts that are popping up. And we wanted to just ask you how Promoter 101 has managed to keep itself kind of as a standalone, a little bit apart from the rest, and how you kept your brand integrity, if you will.
Yeah. There's something like 440,000 podcasts in the Apple Store right now. It's an insane number. It's just like the same number of music, right? There's Spotify estimates that like 50 to 60,000 tracks are released every Friday. How do you cut through all that? You have to do a good job of building brand and building marketing, and that is the key to having something lasting. You can have something that's viral and attention capturing for 20 seconds and be gone in a minute. It's a competitive world out there where we're competing for attention, and brand cuts through that stuff. And so for us, continuing to invest in great interviews with people and getting great names that people wanted to hear was really important to us. And so we tried to always kind of one up and add names that people wanted to listen to on the podcast. And fortunately for a lot of us, some of those names worked at big companies, and we would be on the WME or CAA email list, and that goes out to 3,000 employees that are on there. And all of a sudden, you've got a couple hundred new listeners every week from those kind of things. So we used, obviously the networks of some of these larger companies to kind of, talk about corporate communications and marketing of their own team members, employees, or leaders, and that really did help us to kind of carve through there. But I think at the end of the day, what is really rung true about Promoter 101 is just kind of the authenticity in those interviews. People might come to listen to me talk about the news for a little bit, or Dan talk about tweets, but the meat and potatoes of Promoter 101 are these phenomenal interviews that are 45 minutes to an hour and a half long, and they break down people's lives and business, and they talk about myriad subjects. And I think having high quality, consistent interviews from people that are interesting has been the thing that has been the differentiator for us, because there's a lot of music business podcasts out there. There are. But we found a niche working with people that want to better understand live. We've had record label people on here before too, but a lot of our focus is about the live experience. And so we found a niche audience that was very interested in this, that was on buy and sell side of live stuff, production, tour managers, some artists that are listening to this. And we went after that niche. And that's, I think, an important thing to note as well too, is that it's easy to try to be this big omnibus and catch everything, but the way that you're going to build a following and an audience is to really serve a niche, and to find a brand that works well in that niche, and just find those people, whatever weird corner of the internet that they are in, go find them, go to them, and speak to them. And that's one way to develop, one of the best ways, in my opinion, to develop a following and a crowd.
I think that's why we started this, because there wasn't a lot of robust learning materials to be a tour manager. So many,
Right.
we all say it ourselves, you just got to learn by doing it. But, we wanted to actually create a place and a community for that. So that's cool.
We definitely all comment back that we wish we had this kind of resource when we were blindly feeling our way down the hallways of touring life. One more question that we had for you was about how you handle sponsorships. Obviously, when you're dealing with any kind of broadcast or media-based situation, people are going to view that as an opportunity, whether it's your vendors have an opportunity to expose them to get some exposure, or you might have an opportunity to monetize a media situation. Tell us how you guys approached your sponsorship situation, whether you decided to, and if you did or didn't, why?
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately for podcasters, the marketplace for advertising and sponsorships isn't the size that it should be when you consider how really engaged audiences are. Let's just say, I see an Aventrix shirt on here. So let's just say that Master Tour wanted to reach 3,000 music industry professionals. I don't think there's a better place to go about a tour management software platform than a podcast like Promoter One or TM 101. I don't know if that's a product placement that I'm seeing in this, or whether that's intended to cross there. But
just swag.
Yeah,
the inevitable swag.
Yeah, but for us, it was a little bit about, if we knew that if we took on some of the sponsors that might be likely candidates for this. You know, it might be a product that we didn't fully endorse for things, and trying to find the right fit for what that was without making it sound too incredibly corporate was a difficult challenge for us. And I think ultimately we made the decision not to go with sponsors or ad sales initially on the run for things, because it kind of prevented us from being able to say what we wanted to say. It's a small town crowd, and if one week we're having a problem with some service that we had just been shilling 3 weeks later, which is like not out of the realm of possibility, I don't know if we'd be able to say those things without looking ourselves in the face. And so at the end of the day, this was largely on Dan's back, but an enormous shouldering of costs for the production side of things without any revenue on it. And so I think we've talked in the past about maybe licensing the catalog and providing some sort of revenue source for that, for some sort of charitable organization that we would like to support, whether it be Music Cares or something like that, and sell ads against that, or sell spaces against that for something else. But by and large, we really wanted to kind of have the absolute kind of authority to bring on whoever we need to within within the podcasting world or within the music business world, and not be encumbered by, we're taking on X, Y, and Z startup. Now we got to have the CEO of that startup on this podcast and make it all about that situation. Not that there weren't those cases. Believe me, I think we were approached a few times by people that were interested in doing that, but it just didn't make sense for us at the time. For those of you who are sensibly running a podcast business, you should do the exact opposite of what I just said there. You should find a way to monetize and look at brands that align with what you're talking about, and find a way to integrate interviews, pieces, or whatever into your podcast, because that is the way forward. Between Patreon and ad sales from a podcast network and sponsorship, that's going to be where you make your bread and butter for stuff. So how have you all approached that? Have you thought about that for what you're going to do here?
We've talked about it internally, but we all sort of collectively feel that the industry has given us an incredible lives, and we wanted to pay that forward and give back this knowledge right now. And none of our listeners are working, so we'd hate to charge for anything that we do, but it's still, as we grow, we look to find these opportunities of sponsorship because we feel it could help our students and our program. But we're just trying to keep the wheels on this thing every week right now.
Yeah,
luckily between 7 people on a panel, you can cover operating costs pretty easily and pretty cheaply. But I think if, there comes a point, if you up any production or just whatever, you start to think about those things.
Yeah, we definitely have felt all along, and we continue to have these conversations amongst ourselves, that the giving back part of this is really what drives us, the contribution to community and to connectivity during this time when we're all so disconnected, and to keep the next generation of up and coming industry leaders interested and gaining knowledge. We had talked about maybe getting some sponsorships or some monetization, specifically when we talk about advancing our technology as a group, or adding in something that is going to cost us more than things that are okay for us to just go out of pocket for. When we start looking at maybe getting some technology involved, then we start talking about how we might consider reaching out. And but again, the bottom line for us has been the integrity of how we're doing it, and that we don't intend or want to in any way be exploitative, if that makes sense. We're doing this because we want to give back to our business and keep it healthy. And if it means that we're growing, so we may move forward to look at sponsorships, but that'll only happen if it's offsetting a hard cost, not just for the hell of it.
Anybody wants to sponsor us, go ahead and reach out.
That is the beauty of the podcasting business, is the barrier to entry is very low, right? I mean, it's a microphone, a website, and then the services to send those things out is very little. It's all in the marketing and branding, as we talked about how those things grow. But I really do have a great deal of admiration and respect for the fact that you've taken that position and want to make what you're doing here, be almost a bit of an educational legacy piece for the collective work and experience that the 6 of you have. And I hope that it's a you know, and I can tell from the chat and from Watch of the Week stuff too, that people really are taking a phenomenal amount of value from this. I think that's great to have. You know, there's no education for tour management. You know, what you're doing is
There is now.
Yeah.
There is.
I think,
now.
you know, that's one reason we've chosen to kind of talk more about the nuts and bolts and universal topics than really dwell too much on, you know, too much on current events, because we really would like this stuff to have a long shelf life.
Right.
You know, I would love to have been able to refer to something like this when I was starting.
Right.
You know,
Right.
because sometimes you have your mentors and you have your connections, but you can be a little shy sometimes to make a call. But, you know, not just learning this stuff from looking at a webinar and somebody's discussing it, but it's like, it's also a little bit of of like a connection point. You know, it's like I might have had then a little bit more confidence to reach out to somebody like a 5-1 or a Henry and be like, hey, I just saw you on Tour Management 101 talking about this. Can I ask you another question? To where early in my career, I wouldn't have even known who to reach out to.
I feel like there's so many similar stories of just like getting thrown into the fire and just having to kind of figure it out on your own. And back in the day, there wasn't really any real resources. So you were just kind of going in there essentially with your head cut off. And like, I can't even imagine, you know, having, you know, 40 episodes of how the industry works and being able to refer back to X, Y, and Z of scenarios and how this could be done. Not to, you know, pat ourselves in the back or anything like that, but there wasn't a resource available, you know? So it's definitely been the forefront to just give back to the community and hopefully change that narrative.
And also, I think, you know, one of the you know, before we move it along, you know, one of the things that I think is important right now, when I was coming up, I was emulating men, because I did not have any female road manager or tour managers at that time, years and years ago. And I'm talking about 30 years ago, when I was first having dreams of tour managing. I went out and bought an Anvil briefcase because I understood that tour managers had that briefcase, and that was an important tool. Briefcase first, y'all. I don't know how to, you know what I mean? But there were no women coaching us. There were no organized nothing. There was nothing organized, and I really wanted to do this. And so I did a lot of eavesdropping and a lot of, you know, back to Andy Summers years ago, just gleaning everything that I could and trying to put it into storage banks and assimilate that information and somehow save it to use it down the road. We didn't have a single industry conference. You know, there was just nothing.
Well, also, I think your bubble gets really small. You know who you know. And it's been really great to be able to have visibility of all different people. Like, we have this platform where we can show all different people that are already working in this business that I never saw coming up, you know, of all different ages, colors, you know, backgrounds, genders. And it's, you know, that are already doing it. You know, it's not a new thing. They just haven't been in everybody's little bubble that they develop. So this has been a nice platform for that.
Totally.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So Luke, can you tell us during the show or at the beginning, or what point did people start reaching out to you wanting to be on your podcast? Or did you reach out to people at the jump of people that interested you guys the most to speak with?
Yeah. Well, we were really lucky, and I saw a question in the chat from John Paul Greenock here about our first guest and how that came about. We were really lucky to get Tom Ross, who was the founding member of the CA music department. Tom is a legend in the music business, has worked with, you know, a lot of crazy names, and was a great interview. He's just a phenomenal, gregarious storyteller and makes for that great intersection of education and entertainment, and was the perfect first guest. He knew, you know, enough people knew who Tom was to give us the kind of instant, you know, credibility and everything around the brand. And Tom was a phenomenal guest to come on and talk about his first day as an assistant getting stoned with, you know, Jefferson Starship. You know, like it was just made for a phenomenal episode. And those first bit of episodes were a lot of Dan's friends and my friends that were on the podcast. Dan was kind enough a couple of years back to invite me to the Aspen Live Music Conference, which is Jim Louie's conference in Aspen every top of December. And it's a tight-knit bunch of people that have been going to this conference for 20-something years now. And it includes, you know, Andy Summers and Craig Newman and Bob Lefsetz and, you know, I mean, it's all these great names come to this thing to ski and talk about a lot of issues in the music business. And the Aspen Live family DNA is all over those first couple episodes of Promoter 101 in terms of who we booked on the show. And we were able to really reach out to those that network of people and get them booked on as guests for us to kind of provide us that content. And I'm pretty sure Aspen was our first live podcast that we ever did as well too. Dan interviewed Jay Marciano, who's the CEO of AEG at Aspen Live pretty early on. So it gave us a pretty great platform for that. So, you know, I don't know exactly what episode people started kind of doing incoming stuff. I'd probably imagine it was probably after like 70 or so episodes when we've been doing this for about a year and a half or so at that point. And people kind of started to recognize it from seeing it at conferences or seeing it all over, you know, whatever networking groups. And so we'd get, you know, at first the kind of joking comments like, when am I going to get on the podcast kind of thing to, you know, hey, I should really come on the podcast to talk about those things, like full on pitches for stuff. And we were pretty selective about, you know, who made sense to come on the podcast. And a lot of it had to do with connectivity with previous interviews as well too, you know, like in a conversation, hearing a story, talking to somebody about some experience, so-and-so's name will come up and like, that's a great person to grab to be able to tell their side of the story and how things branched off from there and really provide that kind of, you know, overarching sense of anthology that came from this podcast. So it took us a while, you know, I'd say about a year, maybe a year and a half or so before people really started hitting us up, or, you know, the corporate communications PR person from a company would be like, I'd like to put this person out front for this billboard thing or whatever, you know. I mean, there are people that are constantly thinking about what kind of business to business angles you can work to elevate the profile of team members. And I think that we were one of the likely outlets for a lot of people that were seeking Polestar Awards or whatever at that point. So we were very, you know, to Dan's credit, very cautious about navigating that stuff and never getting too political with things, because I think we would become the kind of repository for go collect X amount of votes by having someone on and knowing that their episode would be out at a certain time to be able to shill and say, hey, you know, vote for me for, you know, whatever award was up that time. So
would you have artists on the show, or would publicists or booking agents for artists ever reach out to you to try to have them on?
You know, we've had we've not really had artists on the podcast. We've had one or two in the past, but we had booking agents kind of reach out to us about possibly getting artists on there, but we really wanted to shy away from that. If artists were coming on there, they were coming on to talk about some cause that was important to us, for sure. Dave Navarro was a great interview at the end of our podcast that he came on and talked a lot about you know, music cares and what that meant to him. And that was, you know, having Dave on there specifically to talk about that. And so we didn't really make it the place for artists to come on the podcast. Not that we wouldn't be open to it, but it would have to be the absolute right type of artist who could speak really well to the business, because we're not in there to necessarily talk about like your wild backstage stories. We want to know like what was the progression of development and all those things as well too. So yeah.
Context had to be there.
Exactly.
So Luke, one of my favorite parts of the podcast was always been the news section and the gossip section and some of the things you guys came up with. And I was always curious if you ever had any trouble with those or said anything that you had to take back or anything like that with within the news segment, or subjects that you touched base with during interviews.
Yeah, there's a lot on the editing floor. Let's just say that. I definitely, we weren't out to necessarily be journalists, right? I'm not a journalist. I didn't want to be breaking stories. But we would, in a lot of times, hear something from 4 or 5 different people at a given time and want to talk about that on the podcast, like a well-known rumor. We weren't trying to be like a gossip rag like Deadline. Deadline's actually a verifiable journalistic source, but I mean, just in the way that they kind of break things sometimes before they check things out. We wanted to kind of be somewhere between that and like the feel of like Hits Daily Double, if you're familiar with Hits. For those of you who aren't, it's a trade magazine that Lenny Beer runs out in Los Angeles, and it talks a lot about executive shakeups and, you know, earnings reports and things like that. We wanted to talk about the macro elements of business, but from time to time we would just, you know, hear stuff in the transaction to business, whether it be like, you know, remember when Firefest was happening, there was just so much stuff flurrying around from people, and we were getting texts from people that were either there or involved or agents, and just kind of hearing the ups and downs of that. Or like Pemberton, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the Pemberton Festival, that really fell apart. Yeah. Jim is raising his hand right now. You know, all the back and forth of that, we were very tight-lipped about it, even though we really did want to talk about things. And I think I never really got in too much trouble talking about the news, but I would open my mouth and say some things, you know, once in a while that some folks didn't want to hear. And so for us, it was this kind of little juicy morsel that we had every week where we could talk about that kind of stuff and not be too worried about, you know, the scrutiny of it. So we never took the news super seriously in a journalistic perspective, but we did want to talk about real macro serious issues that were going on in the business and apply some analysis to that. And so every week that we did do the news, I really did enjoy being able to kind of break down some more heady concepts from a business analysis perspective.
And what about technical issues? How did you deal with that? And have you had any things that you had to deal with from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think I was really lucky to have Dan be fixated on working some of these problems out. Because the first interview I did, we were like, it was a practice interview, I think, maybe with Jamie Loeb. I was like in a hotel in Reno, getting ready for a tour start at the Grand Sierra, doing it from a phone, and it's just like the quality was so bad. You know, we didn't have the proper mic set up for road stuff. Wasn't ready to do this on the road. Really struggled for, you know, a number of episodes to just kind of find a rhythm and find a format for it. And finally, Dan was able to find a guy that was our initial producer and engineer of the show that kind of helped us take a Blue Yeti mic in front of me here or a couple SM58s in a mult box and run it through a very simple thing to put into a Dropbox file and have somebody edit down. That took us, you know, 8 or 10 episodes to kind of figure out just those mechanics of it. So the rough early audio, which if I were to give any advice, you can't ever start a podcast that way. Like the line of democratization on terms of what people will listen to probably begins and ends with shitty cell phone, you know, or shitty phone recordings. You need to start from the start with great equipment and great sound and great production value to get taken seriously for it. We didn't do that for a few episodes and then really got it together. And we added the song, which the theme song that you heard at the top of this, I have to give a giant shout out to Craig Newman, who's at the Agency Performing Arts over at APA. Craig is a phenomenal agent and father and friend, and he's a great songwriter and performer. And he wrote that song and a multitude of remixes of that song. And he called it, the song was called Tongue Bath, in a very typical Craig Newman styling. And so we were able to add things like that and bumpers in between things about people tuning in and listening to Promoter 101. Those production value things certainly helped, but we didn't do it alone. I've been very lucky for the past 140 odd episodes to have a guy named Connor Merritt, who's based in Seattle and worked with Dan for a good bit of this run to be our kind of engineer / producer on the podcast. Connor would be, you know, he wouldn't necessarily be in the room for any of these interviews. We would pre-tape a lot of stuff and then mess up a lot and like have to restart in interviews. And then Connor would cut all of our ums and uhs and does and out of these things. I mean, what you're doing here live is really way more challenging than what Dan and I were doing, which was, you know, I mean, the number of takes that we'd probably take on a given week, just joking back and forth where we couldn't get through a line it's kind of embarrassing, to be honest, at least for me personally sometimes, because I know I just can't nail things.
Dude, it's scary going live, but
it takes a lot of prep.
Yeah, you know, like I'm a perfectionist, so if we had the option to be able to cut things in and out, we would never get done.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, Connor was just such an awesome killer partner on all this. It makes us sound so good on a weekly basis, and we're really lucky to have somebody to lean on that part of it. Otherwise, it would be so much editing. You know, I have my friends that work as engineers, either in radio or pre-taping stuff in TV. I have a whole newfound respect for the work that they do, because people really do mess up a lot in interviews. I hear from my own clients, you know, like not everyone's perfect. They want to do a retake of it, and editing like the audio bits or long pauses in between things. I mean, that's you know, maybe for an hour-long interview, that could be hundreds, maybe 1,000 cuts. Who knows? Like, I mean, how many little things you have to trim and edit to make an interview sound great. Connor does it with speed and just grace and humor every time, and I really appreciate having him and as a resource for sure.
Takes a team. Yeah, luckily we are all pros at putting on live shows, so
Yeah.
it helps. But you know,
We got the keep it moving factor. We got the keep it moving part of it down in our DNA. So,
Yeah.
you know, we figured out how to, you know, sort of turn that into this webinar situation. And you know what? If it goes out and it falls down, it's organic and natural. And we see it and we use it as a little bit of a learning experience, and you know, keep it moving. And it's been really, really fun to grow with such an esteemed group of colleagues. It really
So-
has.
So Luke, who stands out as being the guest, your favorite guest or guest that stood out over the course of the years?
Well, Jim, you were my favorite guest of all those times. You can
The first time I was on the 7th episode where you didn't hear anything I said the entire time because I was on a hotel phone and you guys were too nice to tell me that you couldn't hear me.
Yeah. Speaking of early production blunders, Jim was a victim of one of those things where we figured out the audio on episode 7 or 8 when you came on the podcast, and still to this day. But Jim is it is a great interview in there. I think some highlights from the interviews that you know, I've either been a part of or listened to. There's so many people in this podcast. I mean, you have Michael Rapino, the CEO of Live Nation, coming on the podcast and just being another brilliant mind with Dan on a keynote stage. That was phenomenal. But I think of other things that aren't necessarily the huge names that you've heard of that stick out to me. And, you know, 3 kind of interviews that I or just remember being in the room and being blown away by. The first, I think, early on was episodes 30s something, was Brian O'Connell from Live Nation Touring in here in Nashville. Brian is, you know, the head of country music touring for Live Nation. He's responsible for all those big shed amphitheater tours. And at the time, he was just batting 1,000 on starting new festivals throughout the country, which for those of you that are in production, festival, talent buying, you know, investing in those things, you don't bat 1,000 in those things very often. And BOC was on a tear in that world. And just to hear his, not necessarily about those successes and how large they were, we never really talked about that. We talked a lot about his approach. Every info at Lake Shake and every info at FGL Touring or whatever, BOC sees those things. He gets like 3,000 emails a day, and he doesn't respond to them, but he certainly reads them and forwards them along. And he's just so in touch with the details of his business. And he does it in a way that you think, man, for a guy managing 8 to 10 country tours and 4 festivals, like how could he possibly have the time and bandwidth to do that and run a department? But he finds the way to do it. And it was a phenomenal interview just to understand that even though you get to a certain level in your career and have successes, the details that, you know, you started working on in the beginning still matter a great deal. And BOC's attention to that is why he's probably at the top of his game. So that was one great interview that I really enjoyed early on. There was another one that really had not a whole lot to do with music. It was a panel that Brian Penix, Wayne Forte, Andrea Johnson, Dan, and I did at the Western Arts Alliance conference that we used as an episode for Promoter 101. And Wayne Forte is an agent for a lot of great bands, Tedeschi Trucks being one of my favorites. And Wayne spoke really openly for the first time, this is probably 2017, about the effects of this just volatile business on your life. And he talked about his divorce and his relationship with his kids and everything that came about as a result of, like, you know, the kind of trappings that you can find yourself in, and not necessarily like the trappings of wealth, but just the trappings of the workaholic rat race that is the music business. And it was a little bit before, or maybe right as mental health was coming clear as clear into the picture as something that was really important to people. And the way that Wayne spoke about it, just remember like seeing a human side of things for somebody that has been in this business and booked The Clash, to hear him talk about how it's hard at times was refreshing and just great to know that somebody else is kind of having the same troubles you might be having out there. And I think that's really important in a time, especially now when it's really easy to go to dark places really quickly, right? Yeah. So Wayne's episode, Wayne's interview, Wayne's comments specific on that were always great. And I really appreciated him sharing all that stuff that day. And then I think for this crowd, for Team 101, I gotta say what's up to Ina Jacobs, who I recently interviewed for Promoter 101. She was.
I listened to that. It was great.
It was really good.
Yeah. I didn't really know Ina that much before interviewing him. I just had some clients at CAA, and I was looking for a resource at CAA. I was looking. I forget exactly what I was looking. I was trying to help out one of our production and tour managers with some questions, and wanted to connect them with another person. And somebody mentioned to me that CAA had basically like an in-house consultant that could help train up these people, but did way more than that. But background came from doing stadiums with One Direction, so you got a venue question, top of the top right there. And Ina is just, like a beautiful soul and an incredible person, and brings so much perspective from 20 years in the road and now 5 years at CAA doing what she's doing. I just think that there's not a lot of players like that in the business, especially at agencies, doing what she's doing. And she does it very well. And so I think when it comes down to like learning and mentorship, having somebody like that inside CA to like help agents be a better agent or help assistants learn the business, and it was like phenomenal for that. And I thought she was just very funny and great and gracious as well too. So
we loved having her on. If our students, if you guys haven't seen it, check out episode 23 with Ina Jacobs. We called it Forging Your Own Path, because that woman definitely made her own path, and it's incredible.
Yeah. And she's a phenomenal person. I'm glad that you had her on here. I haven't seen that one. I'll have to go back and watch this.
Hey, Luke, was there any guests that you guys wanted to have on your podcast but were unable to get?
Yeah, that's kind of why we're still going a little bit on this, I think, is to collect up some of those names. I've had a great deal of admiration for Rob Light and the business that he's created. We had Mark Geiger on the podcast, and Mark was awesome.
I just listened to that one this morning. That was a really cool interview. And then Jim and David Klein are on that same episode.
Yeah. That's a really good episode as well too.
Oh, by the way, in the first one I did, number 7, I actually did with Bill Siddons was on the same one, and we didn't know that until it actually came out. Dan and Luke had no idea of the relationship that Bill and I had, so it was like the surprise when it came out that Bill and I shared a segment.
That was pretty cool. I think there's a lot of luminary names that we didn't necessarily get to, whether it be Rob Light. I see some people here in the chat, asking about, Houston Powell. He would have been, he's a character over at C3 that would have been a great one to have on here. I know Arthur Fogel and Jake Barry are mentioned here in the comments as well too, but I think Rob Light's a name that I would still love to get on the podcast. I think he's just a phenomenal leader, and I hear so many highly spoken things about him. I think it'd just be great to get the other perspectives around it. And then, I think there's, of course, we would love to have Irving Azoff on the podcast. As a manager, I think for me, there'd be no better in the room to kind of really speak to a legend in that business other than him. And I think, the next chapter for Promoter 101 can definitely be kind of post-COVID, kind of showcasing the future of the business. There's so many other things that are happening right now, like transformative macro things happening in our business right now, that when we get on the other side of this, it's going to be a completely different world for a lot of live events production. And so to kind of figure out who's been doing the most groundbreaking, edge pushing kind of things in the last, 6 months and get them on the podcast. There's so many names that I don't even know, but I know that there are amazing teams and staffs of people out there now working at labels or at Sony doing, concerts in Fortnite and designing, new experiences for fans that we had never dreamed of 6 months ago. And so finding who those people are and seeing how they did it and all this, I think is the next crop of names that we really wanted to I personally want to dive into.
Amazing.
That's
So, you've had such a plethora of amazing guests. I'm sure it's gone up, down, and sideways at times. What makes a good guest to you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the perfect guest is somebody that can be both educating and entertaining. And
For
so,
sure. It speaks to the current trend in edutainment.
yes,
Which is kind of what we're doing here. We try to, we're definitely educating, but we want it to be engaging and entertaining. We don't want to bore people with a bunch of factoids.
right. And I think, a specific lane of all that is probably in people's ability to tell stories, right? Stories and narratives can be incredibly powerful in like the parable sense of lessons, right? So they're also just memorable and funny. And so if you can remember some crazy story that has some important lesson at the end of it, it's probably going to be easy to remember if it's remarkable and funny. And so I always found that the guests that were lighthearted, never took themselves too seriously, could have a good laugh, but tell a good story made for the best guests. Because even though if it seemed like at the surface that we were sitting around shooting the shit, at the end of the day, there was a lesson to be had in one of those stories. And that's why they're saying it. That's why they remember it in the first place. And so I think finding somebody that has the intersection of those things and can tell a story makes for a great guest.
And do you have any tips or do you have a trick for eliciting sort of a good story out of someone as a host?
Definitely, you got to do the prep for it, right? So, I mean, in advance of those things, I always love getting referred stories from other people that know the person. I think that is a great place to start. You can get a lot of information about one person, but I think all of our memories are selective about ourselves, right? But they're very rarely selective about other people.
No.
So I think one of the things that I think was great for us, it became easier as we did more of these episodes, was knowing people that knew the person we were going to interview and go to that person and be like, what is your wildest crazy story about so-and-so, and be able to kind of start from that perspective and have those kind of stories around people. So I think the references and the referrals for things probably led us to a lot of productive conversations with people, we wouldn't ordinarily got if we just sat down in advance with a legal pad and started asking them questions. Those stories may not have come out.
Right.
That's why my suits fried chicken discussed. So that's all I know.
What we got out of that is that Jim likes fried chicken, and that's all he knows. Which I know to be true. I know that hot fried chicken is a favorite. Maybe you want to try it again. You broke up.
That's what Dan. That was the conversation that I had with suits and fried chicken. Those are the things that were discussed in my segments. That's all I remember about them. So they did their homework and did the only things that people knew about me. So
Suits and fried chicken.
They like fried chicken and wore a suit. So yeah.
So Luke, conversely to what makes a great guest, is there we know you definitely haven't turned this into an artist platform for interviews, but is there a segment of the industry that you what do you try to stay away from as in terms of going down the rabbit hole in the guest department?
Well, at a micro level, we never wanted people to sound bad, and I say that about, when I say sound bad, I mean more like look bad, right? We weren't bringing people on to drag them in a podcast and talk about something crazy they did. So if we knew that there was somebody that there was an inevitable path down to an interview that was going to end in some question that was going to be really embarrassing for them, we stray away from those conversations or those interview invitations, just because some people have clouds hanging over them. That's all you can do is talk about that, right? So I think the selection of interviews really allowed us to not have to drag in any of those sort of negative elements for things. Not that people shouldn't be critical of themselves by any means. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, we didn't want this to be a place where they were getting, dragged on when they came on the podcast. So we also found out probably the hard way that some people probably should have a spokesperson. You know, some people aren't meant to be there with the microphone. They have a communications team or a publicist or whatever, and they're brilliant in a lot of other things. But communicating like we're doing here may not be the one thing that they're very good at. And so I think a lot of people have an inflated ego when it comes down to, all right, well, I'm great at this. This will be very easy for me. And it's not. So I think some people just, don't know the limitations of their own abilities in some areas or where to delegate those things. And sometimes I think some interviews, and I'm not going to name them, came, a little dry or like a little short as a result of those things because people just aren't decent in front of a microphone. And that's okay. This is not an easy thing to be doing.
I got one more for you before we move on. Do you have an evasive maneuver to get to change, whether it's to change the vibe or to change the conversation? Do you know what I mean? Do you have a pivot point or something that you use to holy moly, like hitting the dump button and getting out and moving it along?
My palms are getting sweaty now thinking about this because we never really had that. Like we never had a ripcord in the tape ones. In the tape ones routinely we'd get down something and somebody would start telling the story and they'd be like, we'd always tell people, like, if you're about to say something to Dan and I, like in the room or to Dan, always just say, hey, Connor, cut that. And he'll cut that, bit from the podcast. So in the room, we never really had the pressure to like get out of that. We would just kind of just awkwardly sit there, and just kind of, next question, kind of move on. And live, we never had that. And we were really, really fortunate to never have to be like, oh, God, let's get out of this real fast. And so luckily in like the 12 or 14 of the live kind of conference appearances we made, we came prepped well enough. We knew what we were going to talk about. We knew that we had 45 minutes to an hour. We had to get this done. Bam. We didn't really get too far off script, but I'm thinking now, I'm like, that was probably really risky of us to not have some sort of like, signal or whatever, to get out of there, So I don't know what signals are these days. I
don't know what signal you would do when you're in front of a live audience.
Well, remember Carol Burnett had, they're very, subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Luke, Promoter 101 can be a resource in itself to learn more about the players in the industry. And we highly recommend to all of our students listen to it. There's so much you can get out of it and get inside people's heads as to how the industry works, has worked, legacy. But which episodes in particular would you recommend? Like maybe your top 5 that would be really helpful to our students to listen to or to start off with, and why? If you could think of any.
Yeah. I think of the ones that I mentioned. I think there were a few that I could add to that list. In addition to, I think Anna Jacobs is a phenomenal resource. I think that Wayne is an interesting story. But I mean, we've had so many great guests in the podcast. We mentioned the Mark Geiger episode. That's one of my favorite episodes as well, too. But more recently, we did some extended series with a handful of international guests, one of which included Steve Homer, who's let me see if I can get this right, co-CEO of AEG Europe. Steve is a badass promoter over there and provided a lot of insight in a really great extended interview that kind of showed some international perspectives and really just business building perspectives. I would have to add from a list of those things as well too. Hearing Michael Rapino talk is, hands down a very obvious interview. Michael doesn't do a lot of like sit down long form interviews. And so having that in our arsenal has been something that's been great for, traffic on those side of things. Arthur Fogel, another phenomenal name that was recently on the podcast. If you haven't seen the documentary, Who the Fuck is Artie Fogel? You should go check that out. He's awesome in that. And then I have to say that one of our last live podcasts we did was with Deborah Rathwell. And Deborah is, talk about being somebody who is just so buttoned up and amazing at her work. Deborah is consummate in what she's doing, and she provided me with a wonderful memory of of doing the podcast and also seeing, Elton John in an evening like that. So she was there in town here in Nashville to do one of Elton's 3 second go rounds of farewell performances here, in between bouncing back and forth between the Bells and Jojo Siwa and Justin Bieber all the time. So those are all great ones, but there really isn't too many bad ones in a bunch. And I'll put my email addresses in there. If you have like a specific type of topic that you guys that you're looking to hear about, I can probably provide you a list of like these 4 or 5 names are phenomenal for those types of things. But I think in terms of like a macro impact, the names that I just rattled off, in addition to the ones I talked about earlier, are great ones to start revisiting.
I really loved the one recently with the National Independent Talent Association.
Nito?
Nito that they just formed. But Nito, and you had the whole panel of founders on, and aside from just talking about what's going on in our industry right now, just they all had the chance to tell their backstory as well, which was incredible. It was really great to hear. They come from such diverse backgrounds, and it was really, really cool to hear a little snippet of everybody.
Yeah, that's been really an important thing for both Dan and I during all this time, because obviously there's a lot of craziness going on in the world. There's so much amazing work happening, organizing the business community to help for the really relief and bailout efforts that we need to sustain as an organization. And so we had Steve Chilton and Adam from Neva on the podcast as well too, which is the venue side of things, venues and promoters. Having Wayne and his team from Nito on there was phenomenal as well too, to kind of provide a platform for some people in the business to hear about these amazing organizations that have been formed, organized, and funded to help fight for the future of our business. Has been great. So I definitely, if you aren't familiar with NEVA, Save Our Stages, or NITO, the National Independent Talent Organization, sorry if I'm butchering that, check those organizations out. And if you need some more insight on that, we have got a podcast with each of them on there.
And I think for our students that are on her, we have a lot of international students, but it's really applicable. I've just been actually looking this morning at a lot of this stuff that's going on in the UK and the big push that's going on there right now. And it's very parallel and very interesting. And since we're an international business, it's really good to have a grip on everything that's going on, really, because we're all interconnected. So,
yeah,
super helpful.
Maybe less so here in the States than we were 5 months ago. The reality is, yes, it is all one. Touring is it's a regional thing, right? Like we're talking about North America and Europe and Asia and all those places, but to get to those places and to have all those markets open and functioning, it is definitely a very interconnected problem. And it's not like you can go just play 2 markets with one type of production and one type of scaling in a room and then get away with that for an entire European tour. It's going to be really challenging to kind of thread the needle of what is open, what is available to us, what will the conditions be when we arrive there, and figure out the next how to effectively and economically route a tour like that. It's going to be a real hard thing for agents and managers and artists and promoters to figure out the next couple months.
So before we wrap, we wanted to we've got a question from Tammy in the chat. What, if any, is relationship between TM and promoters, and what qualities are helpful in a TM? I'll throw out an answer to the first part, and I'll go to Luke for the qualities. What's the relationship between TM and promoters? We are friends and partners. And I can tell you what's going on for me right now is that I'm missing seeing all of my summertime shed buddies, Ron Klaus up in Detroit and Tim McKenna over in Boston and Rob Manley down in Charlotte. And, we get used to seeing our partners in the business. So that's kind of the answer to the relationship between tour managers and promoters. We are partners in show business, and so when we show up on the day, we're partners for the day. As we're advancing and leading forward, we're partners in the whole situation. And what ends up happening is that if you're working a lot in the year, you could see people. I've seen Chris Zappe 2 or 3 times in a year. up in Connecticut. Our tri-state promoters, it's like the every other off-ramp tour up there. Sometimes you just put them on the bus and take them with you. And over to you, Luke, to talk about what qualities are helpful in a TM as you sit on a panel with 6 TMs.
Yeah. I will say that I think one of the biggest qualities that makes a great TM is emotional intelligence and empathy. You know, you're spending an entire day with clients and also with venue people that you might know, right? But a lot of people that you don't know. And they may be coming there with their own sets of issues and problems in that day, but we all have the job to get done in a very short window to motivate people to do so. And so being emotionally aware and being able to communicate well, I think are the most important things, because it's transient in nature, your workplace every day. You're going in and out and seeing new faces, and it's not like you can identify a management style that works best for a person and try that over a couple period of days. You got to get stuff done on that day. Show's at 8 o'clock. Let's figure it out. And so having somebody that is empathetic and has a high degree of emotional intelligence, I think makes for a great TM, both from the venue facing side of things, and then as well as, you know, the management and an artist facing side of things. Having a high adeptness in that is, I think, a really important thing. And then communication, just being able to communicate well, whether that be figuring out what stylings work best for a variety of different people, right? You know, management might communicate one way, an agent another way, this venue that way, this person faxes, you know, this person only does stuff on emails, this person sends out stuff in all caps. I don't mean they're yelling at you. You know, figuring that stuff out is really important. Those two qualities, I think, make for great TMs. And if you're organized, the rest of it will fall into place. I'm probably oversimplifying your work, but you do a really hard job, all of you. So.
Good points. That word communication, I think, has shown up in every single episode we've done. So that's awesome, dude. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We learned a lot, and we'll continue to watch and learn from you guys. So everybody, thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. It was amazing to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. It was great to have you on today, man. It's an honor to have you be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you to you and Dan for everything you guys are doing, and please keep doing them. You know, there's still a lot more industry to come. So to all our students, thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend, and we'll join us on Monday. We are doing an episode on Merch 101. So let's get into merch on Monday with you guys. All right.
Awesome merch gang. See you guys. Have a great weekend. Everyone be safe.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Let's do the wave.
The Zoom wave.